It's great to be back in Perth, and it's good to be here talking about major future developments which enhance the livability of Perth, the public infrastructure of Perth, as well as Perth's future public transport needs and its broadband needs as well. Before I go to the matters that I spoke of before on infrastructure, let me make some initial remarks on Syria. I've spoken again just now to our permanent representative to the United Nations, and on Sunday of this week, our permanent representative, as you know, assumes the presidency of the United Nations Security Council. This is a very intense period of diplomacy, and an intense period of diplomacy within the UNSC on a rolling crisis in Syria. Everyone in the international community in the last 24 hours has focused on the vote in the British Parliament. That is a matter for the British Parliament and the British people. Of course, the outcome of that vote is entirely a matter for them. For the rest of the international community, the focus remains exclusively on the diplomatic process in New York. There are discussions underway in New York about competing texts for possible UN security resolutions, Security Council resolutions. Our ambassador is intimately engaged in that process. This will take some time to resolve. UN weapons inspectors, I'm advised, will be returning will be exiting Syria in the days ahead, and of course their observations are one part of the overall proof test as to what has occurred in Syria. I restate the position that I made clear yesterday. The conclusion of the Australian government is that there is overwhelming evidence that chemical weapons have been used, and we have high confidence that the Syrian regime has been responsible for this act of mass murder. And therefore, the focus now legitimately lies on the most appropriate form of international response. To add to comments I made yesterday, I wish to make plain to the Australian people there has been no request to Australia by any other country let me state that again. There has been no request from the United States or any other country for direct or indirect Australian military participation in any proposed or possible action against Syria. It's important to make that clear to the Australian people. On a consular level, this is a matter of genuine importance for all Australians. I want to draw Australians' attention to a statement by the Foreign Minister warning the 59 Australians currently resident within Syria to leave immediately. Exit options are already limited and may be further reduced as airports and border crossings are closed. The risk of further violence is very high, and there is no margin for safety in Damascus, Aleppo or any other city in Syria. There are no effective means of providing consular assistance to Australians in Syria, particularly outside Damascus. Australians, particularly with families and with children, should exit Syria as soon as possible. Could I also emphasise this point given the uncertain period in which we are living? There are currently some 83,000 Australians living in the wider Middle East. We have 800 in Bahrain, we have some 5,000 in Egypt, 1,500 in Iraq, 10,000 in Israel, 20,000 in Lebanon, 4,500 in Qatar, 6,000 in the Kingdom, 10,000 in Turkey, 16,000 in the UAE. I would ask all Australians currently in the Middle East to consult regularly the travel advisory provided by the Australian government to emphasise what that contains in certain respects Number one, Syria, the advice says, do not travel. In the case of Lebanon, it says, reconsider your need to travel. In the case of Iran, reconsider your need to travel. In the case of Iraq, do not travel across the country. In the case of Egypt, reconsider your need to travel. In Israel, exercise a high degree of caution. Similarly, in Turkey. I simply draw all Australians' attention to this because we have so many Australians living in the Middle East. This is a large number of people. And given that circumstances could change rapidly, it's our responsibility as the government to draw all Australians' attention to these important travel advisories. A lot of effort by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade goes into the preparation of these and review of these on a regular basis. And therefore, to their families in Australia and to those who are abroad, it is very important that you go to the relevant travel advisory website and the Department of Foreign Affairs to observe what, if anything, changes in the advices, including the elements that I've just referred to already. That's on Syria. Let me turn also to the matter that I've spoken about here in Perth today. As I said in my remarks earlier today, the government is on about building the future, and that means building the cities of the future. And that is why we have announced today that if the government is re-elected, we would appoint Australia's first ever Minister for Cities. That we believe is an important development for Australia's future management. Sorry, can someone take care of that? Thank you. Because we know that the future infrastructure needs of Australian cities are large. Their planning needs, their public transport needs, their public rail needs, and on top of that, frankly, their broadband needs as well. Historically, this has been the responsibility of firstly municipal governments and then secondly state and territory governments. But plainly, given the provision of public infrastructure also by the Australian government, including the National Broadband Network, there is a broader set of responsibilities as well. And therefore, we believe this is a key initiative for the future. A Minister for Cities in the national government with priority attached to the 18 major cities of our country with populations greater than 100,000, having a federal or national remit to engage with state and local government counterparts, planning exercises, co-investment exercises, and also advised by the aggregate advice of Infrastructure Australia. The second emphasis that I place today is on the question of outer suburban Australia, where millions of Australians live. An outer suburban growth task force would be established with a 10 years job and growth strategy and with a particular fund dedicated to the question of how we provide funding for small business development in this part of Australia as well. I emphasise this because it is right in itself. Cities is where 70% plus of Australians live and where 80% of our national wealth is generated. And therefore, we have ministers in the Australian government for regional development. We have ministers in the Australian government responsible for our primary industries. The time has come to have a minister responsible for our cities as well. The contrast is clear, not only on public transport, urban transport and urban rail. We believe we have to invest. Mr Abbott says he has no responsibilities in that area and would cut the engagement. Secondly, on the question of the National Broadband Network, he would cut the future expansion of the fibre optic network under the National Broadband Network plan of the government. And thirdly, he has also said, more broadly, that these are matters best left with other levels of government. There is a problem here. Other levels of government are not keeping up with the investment needs of Australia's major cities. And if our cities are not functioning effectively and they are choked by congestion or become inefficient in other areas, it undermines national productivity growth. That's why we believe we must put this front and centre as well.